Okay.
All right, Lauren, thanks so much for doing this. My first question that I have for you is, tell the audience just a little bit about yourself and how you started in the realm of mental health.
Oh man, that's a it's a loaded question, sure. My name's Lauren Border. I am a licensed clinical social worker. I do therapy in the Phoenix area. I do one-on-one therapeutic work with adults and primarily women. Um, I got into this through man, social work. Like many of the people that you interview, I did not start out with the social work track. In fact, I think all I knew about social work was like what you see in movies of like the CPS worker with the like chaotic desk and frazzled and stressed, and didn't realize there were so many other components to social work. So I was an acting major out of high school. I was a theater kid and ready for that. And I actually had my own onset of some symptoms and mental health conditions, kind of childhood trauma cultivating in my first year at college, and kind of realized like acting is not going to be conducive to my mental health. It's not going to be good.
Hmm.
That level of rejection and things that are out of your control is probably not going to be good for me. Um, and so I had what I used to say was like a bunch of different lives. I did a lot of different things. I was like a purchaser. I dealt blackjack. I worked at a bank. Like I just did all of these things. I did a morning radio show for a little while. Um, and then when I was like 25, I think I was about 25, I was like, I think I want to be a therapist. And thankfully, I had worked in a hospital. I was a secretary in a hospital for a while. I had a social worker who I became friends with who recognized what I now know it was ADHD, traits of ADHD, where I would kind of get really into something and then kind of switch and kind of switch and kind of switch. She recognized that aspect and was like, social work would be good because it's really flexible for you. So you could do therapy, but you could also do hospital social work. And if you didn't like that anymore, you could go into community stuff. And when I took my first social work course, the intro just went over the different code of ethics and all the different things. And it was, you don't have to personally believe these, but you have to practice them in your work. And I was like, well, this is just me. So I just, as I define myself now, I'm a super nerd for social work. I just took it and ran with it. I did medical social work for a long time because I worked in a hospital already. And so it was an easy transition. And over time, there were some complications, but ultimately, I was looking more toward having that long-term relationship with people, and instead of in the hospital where it's kind of crisis work, like, okay, here's what you're struggling with, here's the resources. Bye. I hope you do well. Like, take
Hmm.
care. I wanted to be able to be involved in that long term, and I started doing this, doing therapy for like just individuals, getting supervision hours that I needed in like 21, 22, 2021, 22. No, I think it was 21. And thank goodness I loved it because it's a lot of work to get to this.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I often will say the best part is getting to see what people are really capable of. Um, that people are so capable of growing and healing and becoming versions of themselves that they feel safer in, and showing up more authentically and embracing vulnerability and just all of those really beautiful things that make humans human. So
Hmm.
I've always been highly empathetic and highly intensely feeling and compassionate. And I think for a long time I thought it was a trauma response, which, like to a certain extent it was. But it's also, as I've just found over my course of healing and therapy as a client, like I am just this person who just feels really deeply, and I can use that as a strength in helping others find their way to that as well. So
Hmm.
for it.
Yeah, yeah. So, because I was talking to one therapist earlier, one therapist a couple episodes ago, and she said that what got her into therapy was, that she was able to have mentors or have people that knew about the field that would sort of give her tips, advice. So what I'm wondering for you is, was there a specific sort of mentor or someone, whether it be a professor, family member, that said, "Hey, you should do social work. You should consider social work."
Yeah, I have, she's still one of my best friends. So when I was a secretary, I worked in the nursery intensive care unit. I was the secretary for the doctors in a in a Phoenix area hospital, and she was a social worker in that unit, and we just kind of became buddies. And she's really very wise. She's very methodical, like she can kind of observe where I'm tend to be much more like impulsive and there's the ADHD showing up for me. Um, and so I really took her, I don't want to say necessarily advice, but her encouragement, what she had to say. Um, I just really, really value it and I really appreciate it. So she was who I said, I think I want to be a therapist because I started to notice people would come and talk with me. People would just come and want to talk to me. They'd stop in my office and they'd be like telling me all their frustrations and I loved it. And there was a codependent aspect, again, some trauma stuff that informed that I think for a time I was worried, oh no, maybe it's not who I am. Maybe it's just my trauma responses. But then I found, no, that's not the case. It's okay. But her advice, her opinion, even staffing cases when I would be working in the hospital and talking with her afterwards, she really just encouraged me a lot and helped me see that other perspective. I think when I would talk to her, I knew I was going to get a balanced and fair and loving perspective and feedback. And that's always been really incredible. And still to this day, like she's not a therapist. She's works as a medical social worker still. Um, and she still is one of my favorite people to kind of go to whenever I'm debating or struggling with anything that has to do with social work and therapy. So she's somebody I value a lot. My mom has always been a very loving person, so we talk a lot as well. She's been a nurse for like 45 years. Um,
Mm.
and she often worked in she's got ADHD as well, so she would do all these different types of things. But for a time, she worked at Latch Foundation for the Blind and Latch Preschool, and I would go with her and then she would do in-home care and I would make friends with her patients and I just enjoyed spending time with just the different patients that she had with various different like traits and handicaps and things along those lines. And I like fourth grade I volunteered in the high needs class instead of one of my electives. I went and volunteered to work with the kids in that classroom in fourth grade because of that for my mom. So I think all of those things kind of culminated. So there was like role models in my mom of that caring and compassion and like trying to just see people for who they are regardless. But a lot of it also had to do with me accepting myself for who I am. And I think so it was kind of a combination of those.
Mm-hmm. I guess my next question is, like, what is it? Put this into perspective. What's the sort of the difference between, the mental health counseling and the social work aspect of it? Because those two, correct me if I'm wrong, they're different in so many
Yeah,
ways.
they are. And I try to often describe this to clients who I have when I'm meeting somebody new to help them understand the different initials that they'll see after people's names are different credentials. Because when you're not a part of it, it's like, what is all of this? And just off the bat, I can't speak to the counseling education for those
Mm-hmm.
different programs. But with social work, the entire education looks at different marginalized communities and how so many aspects of life impacted them and still impact them. So, from infrastructure involving like racism and various like misogyny and how that shows up and how it shaped our culture and our society and the impacts that has on us now. I think the mental health field for a very long time and still to a certain extent pathologizes a lot of mental health conditions and diagnoses. And I think the way that social work applies that, and I think maybe counselors are doing this too, possibly, but social work, the education is focused on all of these things. It's not just a class. It's like we got a class on like one class or two classes on like therapy, maybe like a couple classes on diagnostics, but everything else was like feminism, racism, LGBTQI plus, like various marginalized communities, whatever's in your field of study and interest, trauma and all of those things, and looking at them from a micro of like you and your direct family, out into your community and your city and your town and your country. Like, so going on into the macro of like, look at all these different impacts. And I think social work really focuses on that and empowering others with education and support and all of those things to figure out how they can function within the context of their environment. And so like now the way that I apply that in therapy is somebody comes in and they're expressing all of this anxiety and we're talking about what they're anxious about. And I'm like, well, that's a natural response. Like for you to feel anxious if you're a member of the LGBTQI plus community and you're looking at different policies and regulations that are directly impacting and harming members of the community, it would be more concerning for me if you were like, I'm doing great. Like you're supposed to have these responses. So rather than pathologizing it as this thing that is who you are or part of your genetic code, it's like maybe there's some genetics involved, but like some of these are natural responses to our environmental factors. We didn't evolve to function the way that we currently function in the US. Um, and so I think some of the social work piece of that is looking at that and not just being like, well, let's see how we can fix that. Again, not that counselors don't involve that. I just know that social work, that's like the foundation of it, of like how to empower people, and meet them where they are.
Mm-hmm. So like, cause the reason why I wanted to bring that up is because I wanted to ask, like, what do you do in your role as a social work? Because I from what I'm hearing, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, social work tends to really take, I would say, a social justice lens that
Yes.
compared to like the traditional mental health field. So how does kind of your role sort of play into that or fit in?
Oh man. Well, obviously it's not to it, you described it really well. There is the absolute, and social justice is built into what I mentioned earlier, the code of ethics. So like even that is built into the code of ethics for social workers, whether you're at a bachelor's level or a master's level, of voting and advocating for those who are marginalized, those who are vulnerable. And I think, the easiest population to think of being vulnerable is kids. So that's where people automatically go. But we know there's a lot more vulnerable populations. So the social justice in that respect, it's delicate with some clients. Some are more outspoken about their own perspective and views. And so you really kind of, it's tailored to meeting them where they are, right? So it might be like with one client, it might be kind of starting to recognize how misogyny has played a role in her upbringing, in her religious upbringing and things along those lines, in order to help her recognize that like, no, like you're not crazy, you weren't born wrong, you aren't bad. There were natural responses, or there's an environmental factor that makes you feel this way in order for power to kind of remain, where it is. So there's aspects of that social justice where, within therapy, we can kind of look at those. And sometimes it's more of like a, hey, do you want to talk about this? And some people aren't ready to talk about it. So if I'm going on a whole spiel about something, I can absolutely act and create a situation where it takes them longer to even want to look into something along those lines. Um, so it's kind of a delicate, intuitive approach. Um, encouraging aspects of learning and kind of looking in, but embracing yourself as well, and instinct and intuition. And so, I just had a client, we were talking about this, where she's starting to see misogyny in her like adult children, and she's getting really frustrated. And it's something that we were never like, hey, we're going to work on learning about misogyny and how that affects you. But it just naturally kind of was a part of it. And because of my background in education, I can see it really clearly. And so being able to mention aspects of that as part of the system that kind of created and cultivated this version of her that she's struggling as, um, pointing those things out. And over time, it ended up inadvertently deconstructing some of her religious things, because she was able to then, once you see it, you can't unsee it, I often say. So once you notice that this is present, it's really hard to not notice it, and in the initial stages be enraged by it oftentimes. And so the social justice component is really just trying to recognize where we have injustices and inequity, and encouraging people to lead with vulnerability into looking into those. Like, if you're uncomfortable about it, that's a good sign. Let's lean into that discomfort and find ways to feel safe in it.
Mm-hmm. Because my next question was going to be like, what happens in the therapy room? So you're with a client, they sit down, you sit down. So what usually goes down? How does
Oh
it
man,
work?
this is such a hard question for me to answer. I have new clients ask me the same question. One, I always just present, like, I'm a very casual type of therapist. I think a lot of my generation of therapists are more toward casual, where I think historically it was very formal, buttoned up, and the boundaries were very like, I tell you nothing about myself. Um, and I think the newer generation were kind of like, okay, we can have boundaries without it being like, I'm not a human. Like, um, so, typically I'm wearing jeans, I sit crisscross applesauce, like take my shoes off, like we get comfortable, we get casual. I often tell people, if you want a formal therapist, I totally support that. It's not me. Like, I'll encourage you to find somebody you feel comfortable with, because it's super important. I have a different approach that I kind of lean more toward the intuitive approach with things. And so modalities and treatments that I use, it's kind of like a combination of tools that I have, as we call it, our tool belt, um, of like the standard cognitive behavioral therapy, because I think that has a lot of merit and can be really beneficial. But when we stop with just that, it also can do a lot of harm. So cognitive behavioral therapy is the idea that your thoughts create your feelings, which then create your behaviors. So if we want to impact your behaviors and shift things, we've got to be able to find the thoughts. Um, and so a question that a CBT therapist might ask is like, oh, so you were at the store and you felt like everybody was watching you, and that they were assuming you were going to try to rob them. And so what other things could they be thinking, or what other things could be happening there to help alleviate this feeling of like isolation, and that you're like paranoid that people are out to get you. Well, I'm sorry, but if you're a person of color in the US and I go, well, what other, like, that could be very invalidating to say that it's probably not that, it might be other things, instead of recognizing like, maybe your lived experience, that's actually the valid thing. And if I'm sitting here telling you you should question it, I'm invalidating your experience because I don't share it. So
Mhm.
there are aspects of CBT that really have merit, but I think, like most things, like, okay, but not all the way across the board. Like, we have to be able to take bits and pieces. So I involve that. Obviously the social justice lens, misogyny. A lot of times people find me who are undiagnosed neurodivergent, which is what I was until this year. Um, and so that's really kind of a place where I am headed toward specializing in that, but I need to do my work so that I'm not doing any transference with that, which is seeing myself in the client and trying to help myself through them, essentially, which is a pitfall that therapists can get into. So um, I do brain spotting for trauma, um, which tends to be more intuitive as well.
Mhm.
Um, so we'll find like humor. obviously, like I'm kind of silly, I'm more casual. Um, but I'm also very loving. And I think I used to always say, like, I just want to get a giant rocking chair and a big swaddle blanket, and I just want to like swaddle and hold all of my clients because a lot of
Yeah.
my clients have like these inner children who are so wounded, and I can like, it's almost like I can see that wounded child and I just want to like love on that child. Um, and so there's a lot of that. There's also a lot of like, and this is probably some of the autism for myself, but like I'm very like my face is going to tell you. I'm fairly transparent. So I tell my clients, like, even if I was trying to like hold it, like I'm not very good at it, you're going to be able to see it. I'm going to be gentle, but I'm also going to be direct at, I once had a client say, well, you always call me on my BS. And I'm like, I do. I don't even mean to do that. I'm sorry if it's offensive. And she's like, no, it's not. I need it. Like you do it in a loving way. I'm like, well, thank you for that feedback. Um, but holding myself accountable as well if I have missteps. I think all of that. So being transparent. It's hard to say like what we do, like because it really is what is where you like where my client is in that particular day at that particular moment, and learning more and more over the past 5 or so years to trust my intuition and my instincts of connecting with people, which is something that I've always been able to do in the one-on-one capacity.
Yeah. Because you mentioned, a different modality, CBT, brain spotting, and the others. Like which do you use most often, and like separately, which has been like your favorite?
Oh, um, brain spotting, I really, really love because it feels like magic. I've done brain spotting as a client, and my experience with it is it's incredible. I think the social worker in me also really loves it because it really draws on your own inner wisdom and your own like wisdom of knowing what you can handle, what you need, how to heal, all of those things. So brain spotting really goes more toward that midbrain, the subconscious part of your brain to do that. Um, it for me, I chose to do that as a client because of my own like physical difficulties. So a lot of EMDR involves like moving your eyes back and forth to watch a light bar. Not all
Tapping, tapping as well.
tapping is one, but most EMDR therapists at the time that I was wanting to do my treatment for my own trauma used the light bar, and I have binocular vision dysfunction, which I didn't know at the time. That was another recent diagnosis. But essentially, my eyes were just straining all the time, so I had physical pain from like rapid eye movement like that would cause me like would trigger a migraine essentially. So I was like, I can't do that. I need to find something different. Um, and so found brain spotting and really liked the intuitive aspect that my therapist had as well. And then what that also brought in for me was like inner child work. And so I would kind of do this inner child work thing. And then I learned about internal family systems, which I know you've talked to therapists who practice internal family systems, but it kind of is like one of the parts approaches that we have different parts of ourselves internally. Um, and some of those parts are versions of ourselves who experienced traumas and things like that. And then we have adaptions that other parts develop to protect us. And so I don't use brain spotting as frequently because it can be so intense. Um,
Hmm.
I I probably internal family systems is kind of a thread that goes all through it. Um, Probably internal family systems, but not always as directly. It's hard to say because it's just like this cocktail of like my personality, my intuition, and then like my tool belt of just pulling out
Yeah.
whatever seems fitting and appropriate for the client. Um, I think those three modalities, though, of like motivational interviewing is just kind of like a way to talk to people. So I don't like to call that like a modality because I just don't, it doesn't make
Mhm.
sense to me as that.
Y- Yeah, because I've heard brain spotting and motivational interviewing a couple times. Well, brain spotting more so than motivational interviewing, but like what are those two things, motivational interviewing and brain spotting? Because to be honest, I've never heard of it.
Oh, okay. So motivational interviewing is actually being taught in a lot of college programs now because it's a way it's like a way to talk to people so that you can get information from them so that you can understand. But it's based on helping them give you that information in like clear, concise ways. So it's a lot of listening. It's a lot of like helping them. So like if I ask somebody like, "Oh, what does that feel like?" and they're like, "I don't know." Like you could just jump past that, but like an approach using the motivational interviewing would be like, "Okay, well like let's like pause, like let's stay there and like help me understand it." Um so, and then there's like some of the somatic stuff of like learning how to feel your feelings and being in your body, and some of those pieces come in as well. But um, helping them move through the conversation so that you're not just asking yes or no questions, you're asking open-ended questions. You're asking culturally competent and inclusive questions, things along, and again, that's like the meeting them where they are.
Hmm.
Um, Brain spotting is a trauma treatment approach. And actually, I mentioned EMDR as the modality I didn't want to do. But David Grand, who developed brain spotting, I believe was involved in the development of EMDR and kind of noticed in some of that research leading up to the development some little aspects that he kind of then went off on his own and explored in is what developed brain spotting. And so essentially, like I'm just going to ask you a question real quick and see if this works remotely. But like,
Hmm.
do you remember the color of the house that you lived in when you grew up?
Do I remember the color of the house that I grew up in? Um, I believe it was, I think it was kind of reddish, kind of magenta-ish.
Okay. So when I first asked you that, you kind of like looked over here and then you kind of looked over there. Eventually, you did this really interesting thing where you closed your eyes. And so,
Because I was thinking about it.
yeah. Well, and initially it looked like, and what often happens is you were looking for the information, right? Like you weren't directly looking like you were going to see it over there, but you were kind of trying to find the information, and then you ended up needing to kind of block out the visual so you could look inward with it, right? Well, the man who developed brain spotting noticed where we look with our eyes can often be connected to memories. And so if we're saying, "Oh, what was the color of your favorite dress growing up," to a little girl, and she's like, "It was purple." She's looking up here. That's helping her kind of like a keystroke shortcut on your computer access that memory. So he noticed that where we look with our eyes can help us access memories. And so we combine the audio bilateral stimulation. So he has his own album, but you can find tons of videos on YouTube. And they're really relaxing if you do audio bilateral stimulation. It's just the sounds that go back and forth from one side to the other. And it's often described as kind of like giving your brain a massage. And it really does kind of feel like that. It can be really relaxing. So some people will use those as like falling asleep, like sounds that they'll play to fall asleep. But you have to have headphones for it. You can't just like play it in a speaker. Uh,
Hmm.
or earbuds, I guess, is probably what people use now. But so we have this bilateral stim. You've got the safety of the relationship with a therapist. So that's like a really foundational aspect of brain spotting, is that we have to have a connection that you feel really safe with me. Now that's important for any therapy, but when we're going to go into subconscious and trauma work, it's so important that you feel safe. Um, and so I have like do I have one with me? Yeah. Oh no, I don't. Just use my koosh ball and a pen. Um, I have a pointer. It's like it must be in my drawer. It's what's that called? Like when you pull it out, it gets longer and it gets
Oh
smaller.
yeah, that
I
thing.
can't, yeah, I can't think of what it's called right now.
Yeah.
Um, but so I have a pointer and I'll put like one of these little koosh balls because they're easier to see on the end of it. And so somebody will say, "Oh, this is really, really hurting me," or "This is upsetting me," or "This is a trauma I want to work on." first we have to be able to find it in their body. Okay, where's that emotion showing up for you? So some of the precursor work for that is learning how to have some of this interoception, which is the ability to recognize your sensations in your body. So that could be hunger, it could be emotions, it could be having to use the bathroom. So that's something that's challenging for a lot of people who are neurodivergent anyways. Like there's some deficits in that area. But it's still something that we can usually find a language to recognize there's something, maybe I don't know what it is, but it's like right here, there's a heaviness right here, right? So then you found the sensation in your body, and this is where it kind of starts to feel like magic. I'll start to take this pointer and like with my little koosh ball on it, and I'll like move it while you follow it just with your eyes. And we're trying to pay attention to what makes this sensation intensify. And we're trying to find the spot. So we'll start on a horizontal and then we'll go vertical from there to find the spot that activates it the most. And then the client just looks at the spot while I hold space and connect with them. And then their brain does stuff. Having been on the client end of this, every session is kind of a little different. It's been really wild and vivid, which I've often compared it to like the movie Inception. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie.
Mm-mm.
I guess it's an older movie now. Poor concept of time. Anyways, it's a movie where they go into people's dreams to manipulate the dreams in order to get them to do certain things in their real life. And so they like sit in a space physically and they put, I think it's tones in the ears. I haven't watched it in a long time, but they put like these tones in their ears and then suddenly they're in the dream world. Well, they're aware, the people who are orchestrating this are aware that physically they're in this place, but mentally they're in this other place. And that can be what some of the brain spotting sessions are like. So that awareness that you're in two places at the same time, you're here with me, that grounding you to be here with me helps for the safety and security of like, if you get into a trauma that feels really overwhelming, we're going into your subconscious. Like we need to be really conscientious of that and loving about it. And so sometimes it's really vivid, like I just described, where you're like, maybe you're in your childhood home, but you're also aware that you're in the office with me. And sometimes it's more abstract. Um, and I've had people experience all different types of things and share that. Um, and so it's something that it feels like magic because it's subconscious. Uh, but it facilitates this natural wisdom that we all have to know that we can heal and how we can heal and what our limits are. So what's really fascinating to me, and I've always thought is evidence of that, has been that oftentimes when people go toward and we find that connection to that really intense sensation, it comes in waves. So they'll be brain spotting and they're looking at their spot and the intensity will go ramp up all the way up to 10 and they're crying and they're really overwhelmed. And then it kind of goes down a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then it comes back up and then it goes back down. And in my view, that just seems like, see, that's your loving self recognizing that if it just went hard at a 10 this whole time, you're going to probably have to just kind of dissociate at some point because it's going to become so overwhelming and intense. So your brain kind of gives it to you in these waves that you can kind of handle. And then you get a little bit of a break from it and you can breathe for a minute and then you go back into it. But every time it's a little bit lesser and lesser of the pain, which allows it to heal. So that's what a brain spotting session is like. And so much more that I'm sure I just wasn't able to articulate very well. It's one of those pieces, like I said before, that I really find is very conducive to my intuitive aspect that I apply to therapy of like connecting with my clients and being with them. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so some of it is hard to pinpoint.
Yeah. Like lastly, what advice would you give to folks that are thinking about entering the mental health field? Not the mental health field, but the social work field that want to learn more about this
About brain spotting or about just being a therapist in
in
general?
general.
Oh, do your own work, man. do the work, go to therapy, and do as much of your healing as you can, because we all have just so much. Um, I mean, generational trauma is where we're at right now. It's passed down, depending upon the culture, it's going to be a little different, but there's so much generational trauma and disconnect and normalization of not feeling your feelings. But doing your own work allows you to really be present with your clients. Um, do your own work. Like, do your work before. You can do it while you're in school, but do it with a professional. Don't do it in school, because that's also really annoying. It's like a
Mhm.
lot of classmates who are like using class as therapy, and you're like, come on, go to a therapist. We're here to learn. Uh, but do your own work, and just try to embrace and love on yourself as best as possible. I think there's this misconception that, like, if you love yourself, then you're going to be um like, it's too much, you become arrogant and you can't. And it's like, oh, it's so the opposite. The more vulnerable you can be with yourself, the easier it becomes to love and care about other people. It's not even that it's easier, it's like almost impossible not to love and care about others, and what people are capable of and deserve. And so I think one of the most beneficial aspects that I have of that is like that I genuinely love my clients. Like, I struggle in, large social settings, as the autism will definitely show up there. But I struggle in larger social settings, but when it's just me and a person, I'm with them 100%, and I genuinely love them. I remember hearing a podcast that was like, you have to be able to imagine yourself loving some of your clients. And I was like, I love all of my clients, and not in an inappropriate, no boundaries way, but just as human beings, to be able to hold them in this high esteem when they can't hold themselves there. I think that is another thing that I tell my clients right away, which is, listen, I know I have the privilege of being with you through some of the most difficult times in your life, and I don't take that lightly. Um, I will hold the hope for you that things will get better, that you can function in a way that you feel proud of, that you can heal. Um, I will hold that hope, because I know it's hard to have that hope sometimes. I'll hold it as long as you need me to. I got it. I know what you're capable of. I know you can do this. I'll hold it. And then when you want to take it back, you take it. And I had a professor in my bachelor's program who said basically that sentiment. So it comes from Pam, oh, can't remember, Scala, Pam Scala. And it was so inspiring to me.